Welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here for The Future of Work is Gray, our conversation with Dan Pontefract, who has just written this book that came out this week. And we're so excited to talk with him on the same week that the book has emerged. My name is Seth Green, and in a morning like this one, I'm grateful to say I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And let me welcome you to our gorgeous campus in Hyde Park that is every bit this green and glorious today as we embrace the spring here in Chicago. For more than 130 years, we have been the university's home of lifelong learning because we are one of the three founding divisions of the University of Chicago. Because when William Rainey Harper and John D. Rockefeller was setting up this university, they also may have realized the future is gray and decided that not only should we serve our traditional students at an undergraduate and graduate level, we should think about learning across all ages and stages of life. And so they created what was then called the extension to extend the intellectual resources of the university to individuals across the lifespan and across all geographies. And we continue to play that role today. I'll just mention that we have lots of events. This is a spring full of intellectual generativity. Next week, in person and online, we will have Don and Liz Thompson. Don led McDonald's, Liz led City Year, and together they leaned in, and we're going to hear from them about how they approached excellence as a couple as they were each in that incredible two-career mode. We're then going to have a conversation very relevant to today's conversation on a new book, Longevity Nation, looking at how longevity is reshaping everything in our society. And then we're going to talk about being a little more social with our behavioral economist at the Booth School, Nick Epley. I'll also mention that our summer course registration is open, and we'll get that into the chat shortly. And I finally will take down my screen because we have our wonderful guest, Dan Pontefract. And let me just give the briefest of introductions to Dan. So Dan is many things. He is an award-winning author. He is a leadership and culture strategist, and he is a renowned keynote speaker. His book, The Future of Work is Gray, was just published, and we're going to talk about that. He has 5 other books to his name, many of which have won major awards. He was previously the chief envisioner and chief learning officer at TELUS. And so he is someone who has a lot to offer, which is why you'll regularly see him in the Harvard Business Review and other publications. And so, Dan, I want to start because one of the things that this book talks about is what you call the age debt wake-up call. And you describe age debt as the workplace equivalent of the climate crisis, a kind of slow-moving, structurally embedded accumulation of neglect that compounds quietly until it becomes irreversible. So can you talk about age debt, what that accumulation means, and how you came to be familiar with these workplace challenges?
Seth, well, first of all, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I have been on that campus, by the way. It is glorious. I think I need to become, you might have some poll, the adjunct prof from Canada as part of your campus and your school. Fantastic to be here. I'm also friends with Michael Clinton, and so I have an events copy of that as well.
Great.
Mr. Clinton is in The Future of Work is Gray book, so I just want to give shout out to Michael. He's a trailblazer indeed. Great to know that he's on the program. Okay, to your question, age debt. So it's hiding in plain sight, and that is kind of 4 factors, Seth, essentially. So first is woohoo, good news. We're living longer, but we're not prepared. So there's this longevity piece that Michael actually talks about in Longevity Nation. So that's one of my 4 age debt pieces. And I write for leaders in the organization. It's not a self-help book. So number 1, our organizations are not prepared for 100-year lives. That's number 1. Number 2, well, there's a demographic some say apocalypse, some say disruption, whichever way you land on the demography change curve, Seth. Rest assured that America is aging, and consequently, there's also a birth rate plummeting at the same time. So we're living longer, yay, but our average age is increasing in our organizations because we're not having as many babies. Now, I'm not pronatalist. That's not my point. My point is I'm just doing the math. The math says that now and through the next 50 years, we are going to be in organizations that average age higher with less people to hire. So that's number two. Number three, it doesn't get better, Seth. Number three is that we have sort of what I would call a sort of wisdom and capability gap. What does that mean? Well, because we're not preparing our organizations really for what is to be a new talent cycle, we keep, unfortunately, involuntarily terminating or firing older workers, but we're not capturing the wisdom. So not only do we have sort of archaic ways in which we're not able to capture and share that wealth and breadth of crystallized intelligence, I'll call it, we're letting it walk out the door. So that's terrible. And then fourth, just to bring up a four-pack of hits here, ageism. So ageism still sits everywhere inside our orgs. It might be even the last ism that we need to conquer. So whether that is young, middle-aged, or older workers, this ageism runs rampant, and it affects hiring, firing, promotions, development, career paths, you name it. So those four are kind of my age debt points that I've seen in my research, at least, come to the forefront.
Well, and I have to say, with ageism, what strikes me is that it's still in the open. All the other forms, which are awful, have at least come to a place where you can't actually say anymore the, racist or sexist views. I still hear people who will say, "Oh, well, he may be stale," or "he's been there a long time." I mean, euphemisms that we don't accept elsewhere anymore. To be clear, all of those isms still occur, and there's still subtle ways in which they show up. I'm just struck that ageism is one that is still in a place where it is sometimes openly said, even in professional context, to my astonishment, which is just a sign of how embedded I think it may be. So one of the things that you do is you avoid ageism, Dan, which I appreciate, because the same people that say avoid ageism, they then say, well, the way to understand your workplace is that everything is based on your age. And so there are these demographic cohorts. And, if you're the baby boomers, then you think this way. And obviously, when you grew up, when you came into the world, how you interact with the world does shape some of your values, experiences, lens, right? So it's not irrelevant. But your point is it's not determinative. And in your book, you go through the idea that there can be multiple ways of seeing these individuals. And you have what I love, these three R's, rivers, rocks, and rubies, as a framework to thinking about the generations. Can you talk about those three and how you came to them, and how does it inform that if you're leading a workplace, how does it inform how you lead?
What a wonderful question. So maybe I'm hoping for Parent of the Year award, but a couple years ago, Denise and I are raising three kids. We have two girls. They're in their late teens at this time. And we're like, maybe we should be good parents and send them to a Taylor Swift Eras Tour concert in LA. And we did. So Parent of the Year for us. What am I saying? What's Taylor got to do with this, Seth? Well, it actually dawned.
I believe Taylor has to do with everything, Dan. I was at the Eras Tour with my teen girls. So trust me, I'm in. But keep going. I didn't mean to
Okay. So let's see if we're out of the woods, if you will, pun intended on this one. So Taylor sets up her Eras Tour. For those unfamiliar, if you've been living under one of those rocks, perhaps for the last decade, her tour basically said, "Hey, I'm going to provide you 4, 5, 6 song packs from various albums or eras of my, like the Red era or whatever." I was like, oh, wait a second. When I was reading a lot to do with psychologist Ray Catal's work on sort of the psychology of how we become intelligent, was kind of like, maybe I can match these up somehow. Now, Catal basically said that there are two types of intelligence. So I'll come back to Taylor. And that when you're young, you have what's called fluid intelligence. And fluid intelligence is full of verb, ideation, mistakes. You're kind of figuring it out. And then magically, which I think is wrong. Now, this is dated. It's about an 80-year theory. But then we enter into crystallized intelligence, which is the point in which your fluidity crystallizes into wisdom. Now, I have, to your point, and thank you, I've been a chief learning officer. I've been a chief envisioner. I've worked at SAP and TELUS, so high tech and telecom for 20 years. So I'm in charge of leaders and culture and development of teams, etc. I saw 3 eras. And what I saw also within these eras is the fact that it's not tied to birth year. it's actually what we all go through. So instead of just fluid and crystallized intelligence, I said, well, wait a second. Taylor's right. There are these eras. But for us, for you, for your students, for anyone yamming in today, you have three eras: rivers, rocks, and rubies. So rivers does pay homage to fluid intelligence. But when we're a river, it doesn't mean you were born, for me, in 1971, and then my river era started in 1991 when I turned 20. It's sort of what you feel the organization feels or the team feels. It's kind of like that area or that era of the area. So maybe for me, for Dan, it was 18 to 32. Okay. So that's my Rivers era. But then I became...
And just to be clear, Rivers is fluid intelligence, flow. Give us a little bit more of the description of what Rivers felt like for you, 18 to 32.
Perfectly. Thank you. And so that a good interjection. So it's me figuring it out as a professional in academia. So I started out in academia and realizing, I do like the research, I like the teaching, but maybe I need to expand myself. So I'm just kind of individual contributing, trying to figure out my way. And then I made my way into high tech. And so I made my way into a leadership role, but I was still kind of on the cusp of being a fluid intelligentsia and moving my way into some solid thinking and some solid ground and some norms as to what a leader means. So as I kind of made the shift from being an academic to then being a leader of an organizational learning team, I thought, so now I'm starting to figure it out. Now I'm a rock, I would say. So I'm about 30-ish, 31. And I'm now entering my rock era. And so through the next, essentially 18, 19 years, between SAP and TELUS, I become and move up kind of the career development ranks inside being a rock. Now, being a rock is now I'm leading, but that doesn't mean everyone needs to be a leader either. You can be leader of self as a rock. You're just more solid. So you're still in your river, but you've developed some rocks in your own river, if you're following the metaphor. And that means you're stoic. You know how things work now. You've kind of got some experience and wisdom. But then I believe now I turn 55 in just about a month. And so I believe when I left TELUS in 2018, I was 47. So I began to then enter slowly into my Ruby era. And that is because I have learned a lot being an executive, and then I continue to hone in working with consultative roles, et cetera, books, writing, et cetera. I'm now entering my, how do I give back era, this Ruby era, this wisdom where I've learned a lot, can see around corners if you're a Rita McGrath fan, and then say, now I can be able to provide wisdom. So River, Rock, Ruby, as opposed to, hey, Boomer, or as opposed to, I'm Gen X, like I'm still disappointed that there's no more Nirvana and I'm moody and cynical in all my meetings, or I'm Gen Z and I can't pay attention in meeting because I'm always on my phone. These are tropes and memes related to a birth year. That doesn't help us in sort of a culture, age-inclusive culture for our orgs.
Well, and it doesn't help because what you're saying is that people go through these cycles at different points. So you entered at 47 into being a Ruby. There are some people staying as rocks in their leadership role through their 70s. There are other people that are, making these transitions sooner. So it gives us a framework for often the life cycles without projecting when those occur. Talk to me about what it means for leaders. I mean, there's another concept, and I guess this gets into the Ruby stage, especially where you're talking about what you describe as the experience dividend, this concept that reframes older workers not as a legacy cost, but as an appreciating asset. And I'm curious if you could talk a bit about how do you as a leader leverage that? Because I think most organizations' HR architecture, from performance systems to succession planning, we're almost built on the opposite assumption, right? That you're kind of moving people toward retirement rather than, if I had a stock that had this appreciating dividend, I would be stewarding and thinking. So talk to me about kind of what that looks like. How do leaders harness that in the context of the workplace?
So if we want to get rid of age debt, Seth, one of the things leaders need to be thinking about, and whether you're in HR or not, whether you're in the C-suite or not, I'm talking about like leaders, is, to your point, what is your talent mindset? And so what we've been wired to think, first of all, is that, the individual, the only way to increase your remuneration and your salary is to go up. The only way in which to get a fancier title is to go up, so i.e. the career ladder. The only way in which to gain experience is to go up. And so this whole notion that the organization is up and the only way to develop yourself is up is really an anachronistic type of talent thinking. And so
Yeah.
that construct, to your point, right? The HR systems that to me are not just antiquated, but unhelpful in this day and age because of the factors I raised. So not only is there ageism that's pretty rampant, but this whole point that we're living longer. So if we live longer and we're having less babies, and so there'll be less on the talent pool side, don't you think maybe we should also re-architect what talent means, or the development model, or the organizational culture model? That's where the experience dividend comes in. And so, I mean, there's a lot of layers to it, but in essence, I'm recommending three things that leaders need to be thinking about. First is what I call the longevity lens. So this is age inclusive thinking. So, does your organization have premenopause, menopause, and perimenopause opportunities or thinking or practices for women in their rocks and or ruby era? Like, this is a reality. 53% of women suffer from one, two, or three of those. Should we not pay attention to this? Because if people are living longer, they might be going through that later in life or whatever age they are. And if we're not pro age and pro health, then that just seems weird. If we're not providing the rivers with the education competence that they might live to 100, Seth, and that they're not having any financial clarity or preparation for such a venture, what are they doing in their 20s and 30s to kind of not think about it? Doesn't the organization maybe have a fiduciary responsibility, at least a cultural responsibility, to helping them see the light that they're going to live to 100? So longevity lens is just age inclusive thinking, from language and job descriptions to, the town halls and being more age inclusive, etc. Number two is the wisdom wheel. And the wisdom wheel basically, Seth says, what are you doing as an organization to pair up rivers, rocks, and rubies intergenerationally? What are you doing to capture knowledge of a river or a rock or a ruby and then sharing that? How do you make sure that there's cross collaboration happening? How do you have reverse mentoring? How do you have mentoring? How do you have coaching programs? All the stuff, HR talks about. I think you as a leader can really think through how you might want to make that manifest inside of your own org or unit. And then lastly, the career canvas. So my point there is, which isn't subtle, I want to torch the career ladder. I think this idea that the only way in which to improve or highlight your career better, whether it's monetarily or just skill wise, is just nonsense. It's an archaic relic from the 1970s. So if we're living longer and we have more pro contract opportunities or gig opportunities or rotation opportunities, or in fact, someone takes 2 years off and wants to come back to the organization to be an adjunct prof, whatever the case may be is in your world. That's the type of rethinking and rewiring we need to be contemplating for the next 50 years if we want long-term success in our orgs.
It's such a great point because I think about my own experience. And the first workplace I went to, they specifically said we have an up or out culture, right? And the idea was you couldn't stay still, which that I get because you always want to be growing. But the way it was described, right, is that there's only a ladder and then, people fall off at different points. And so the idea that someone could play other roles than a strictly mountain oriented climax was anathema. And your point is, well, maybe that world was in a world where the age population also looked like a pyramid, right? And that no longer exists. Right now we're a cylinder, so we have to rethink how we approach all of that. And I think it's a great observation. And I think what's interesting is that our cognitive abilities often lag our reality, right? Because we're set in the culture that we are grown up in, and kind of our first impressions are based on. And so even me, as you're describing this, I have this kind of initial cognitive dissonance of like, what would it be like not to just keep moving up in your career, even though, as you describe it intellectually, it makes complete sense. Let's talk about the retirement. Excuse me, the retirement thing, because I think it's related. This idea that at 65, you should be retiring, it kind of touches on people's identity, on the social contract they have, sometimes with their employer, and what we've collectively agreed to work for. Obviously, some of this is, I think, culturally specific. I mean, there's been a very different, I think, reaction in France to changing the retirement age than there might be in the US because of kind of how work may be viewed in different contexts. And,
Yeah.
in the US, I think there's an overstatement, but, it's sometimes said people live to work. And I've heard people say, in France, again, overstatement, but, people work to live. So it's when you retire that life begins, is sometimes said. So, let's acknowledge there's somewhat of a cultural sensitivity maybe to some of these ideas, but can you talk about that retirement myth, especially as it appears in the US, and kind of how you see that changing and what evolution you think is important there?
So a couple anecdotes, I suppose. Seth, is another really fantastic question. It's like you're prepared or something. It's so good.
I read a great
So,
book, Dan.
well, thank you for that. A couple months ago, I don't know if you've heard the name before, but a gentleman by the name of what's his name? Warren Buffett retired, and
Yeah, I've heard of him. I think
yeah,
he invested.
is he? He might have been 93,
Yeah.
something like that.
Well, and his partner, Charlie Munger, until recently was even, a centenarian nearly. So yes.
Exactly. Another individual in America, a great Greek. What's her name? Is it Ariana Huffington? I think that's her name. If, might I might want to name check that one, but turns out that maybe she started something called HuffPo, in her late 60s, and maybe sold that. And this month, there's a couple. What are their names? Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. I'm not sure if they
I
sound like
assume
they're
they'll
up
be
and
the biggest concert
yeah,
going. Yeah.
up and coming people. I don't know. They might. I don't know. They're part of some band called the Beatles. You might have heard of them. They just launched two individual solo albums. In one being 83 and one being 85. So I'm obviously being semi cheeky as a Canadian here. What we have to get past is this question that we're afraid to ask and we're more afraid to answer, which is how old are you? And so when individually we can get past that, that's one step. But number two, what our organizations need to be doing is to be age invisible.
Right.
Because if you take it back, if I get semi serious here, when you look at 401k savings in the US for the bracket that are 50 to 65 today, that is not retired, right? The median is $71,000.
Right.
So if a 50-year-old today has $71,000 saved for retirement, and let's just assume they want to retire at 65, do you really think that Social Security is going to help them in this state of cost of living rising accountability when they turn 65 and 15 years from that point? So again, there is an individual need that's going to surface very quickly for people who will have to work. Now, again, you counter that by saying, well, aren't we going to need workers? We will. We're going to need workers. So we're going to need Warren and Ariana and Paul and Ringo in different ways working in our organizations, maybe in different ways. So we have to get past this point of, well, what is retirement? Is it retire or rewire? And both rewiring has to happen at the individual look in the mirror self sense, but it also has to happen organizationally. So organizations have to get past this, well, the golden watch at 65, Dan, and off you go. Why? I mean, your school has professors of emeritus.
Right.
That's what a distinction. I mean, there's just not just gravitas that comes with that, but recognized, crystallized ruby intelligence whereby they can continue to teach or whatever it is that they have with their gigs. So, how about we bring the emeritus professor standard, if you will, into the corporate world, into public sector, so that we can find ways in which for these people to contribute, have a sense of purpose and meaning, but also maybe, chip into their 401k. Is that a bad thing?
Well, we're starting to get questions in the chat, Dan, and the first one is about AI disruption and how
Mm.
you see the, workforce navigating AI disruption and this silver tsunami at the same time. And if you think that AI, which is aimed to essentially be a compilation of knowledge over time, as being a negative or challenging disruption, excuse me,
Bless you.
for the graying of the workforce.
Yeah, knowledge but not wisdom. Intellect but not nuance. You can't necessarily abdicate and or outsource the entirety of what is nuance and wisdom from AI. Now, I'm pro AI, no haters, right? I believe it is such an incredibly complementary tool to one's thinking, etc. But if we think that AI will be the replacement for the River Rock Ruby eras, and I'm talking all three, because what I worry about secondarily, of course, is bean counters and people in charge of EBITDA taking a look at their talent model and in saying, there's an easy way to lessen costs by not having entry level workers and let AI replace those. So then to sort of this line of thinking, a different way to think about the future work is gray being foggy and not great. What happens for those lack of rivers to learn the friction skills to become rocks later on in the org? I worry about that. So that being said, AI can certainly act as an incredibly cool complementary tool. When I did some research firsthand in Japan and South Korea, I saw this. I saw this happening in some of the manufacturing lines for automobile makers in Japan. So they're using and allowing their rocks and rubies on the line to use AI, virtual reality, robotics in ways that, I mean, it just astounded me, but they're still employed. So they're not being replaced. It's complementary beside them. So I think we can, whatever it's, manufacturing, white collar roles, whatever, I think there's ways in which to do this right.
Well, we have time for one last question. Can you give your advice to people that are, in that group that want to stay engaged in their workplace and are aging, which all of us are, but are on
Yeah.
the maybe later side of that? Can you talk about what are your tips for the worker to thrive in workplaces that, as we've discussed, are imperfect?
Fantastic. So a couple. One is look in the mirror. And as much as I love L'Oreal and Aveeno, we age. So you can't pretend to not be, in my case, almost 55 if you're 55. You can't be 35. You're 55. Wear it. Wear it with honor. Be loud and proud about what you are from an age perspective and who you are. So don't fake it. Number two, don't erase your experience. So even if you're moving on to another organization and you're in the process of looking for that next role, on your LinkedIn, on your CV, don't take out your dates. Don't say, "Oh, you know what? That sort of 1990s, 20s era, yeah, that I didn't actually work." Again, you're not doing yourself a service because there are pro-age inclusive organizations that want you. Trust me. But number three, this is the big one, Seth. I think what I've seen happen in a more positive fashion is the individuals who believe that they have what is called transferable skills. So maybe you're an engineer, maybe you're in marketing, maybe you've been in sales, whatever it is that your career has been to that point, you've learned and earned the respect of the transferable skills from people relations, even technical skills, business skills, whatever it is. Don't think you have to be, quote, an engineer your entire life. You can
Right.
lift and shift those skills over to some other profession, and you might unlock something that you've never even thought about. Not just earn a living, but maybe do it in a way in which that just unleashes a sense of purpose you didn't know was in you.
Well, Dan, this has been a phenomenal conversation. It is based on a phenomenal book. I encourage everyone out there to take a read now that it has formally been published and launched. And thank you again on this launch week for sharing your insights with us. We really appreciate it.
Seth, you're overly prepared. This was a wonderful chat. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for everyone who watched or listened.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.